This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hi everyone, it's Matt here. Coming in before the We Made This ident, so you know this is serious. Well, not really that serious. What you're about to listen to is an episode that was recorded in person on the eve of a podcast meetup across the We Made This podcast network. So me and Tony were in the same room, which was quite exciting, and it was a lot of fun. I'm just going to warn you that there is a bit of slight bleed over between the mics that... so we caught each other a bit. I've done my utmost best to try and remove it, but there might be a couple of occasions where you might see a kind of ghosting effect when talking, where I've done a bit of podcast cheatery and tried to slightly move the audio to make things flow a bit more better. So, so this episode might reveal a few of my editing secrets unintentionally. But I'm wittering on and expanding this episode for much longer as it meant to be, and I just thought I'd let you know that if you suddenly hear some kind of weird ghosting, I've tried my best to remove it. I don't think it's there a lot, but I think you might catch some of it. But sorry for that, and I apologise because you are expecting the most pristine professionalism ever from the Shipwrecked and Comatose podcast. We are constantly, pristinely, always on the verge of professionalism and high quality, and I've let you down, potentially. You might just listen to this and you might think you can't hear a thing. So in that case, that was deliberate. I am a fantastically brilliant podcast editor, and I'm wittering on. Anyway, enjoy this chat about the Brittas Empire Series 6.
We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, Red Dwarf podcast, only on the We Made This podcast network. I am your host, Matt Latham, which means that it's most probably going to be a Brittas Empire episode, which it is. We're going to be talking about Series 6, and I have my illustrious Red Dwarf loving, obviously, co-host, Tony Black with me, but literally with me. He's actually physically in the same room as me.
I can actually see you, and it's amazing how expressive you are when you the way you said Shipwrecked and Comatose. It was basically like you just walked on stage. It was amazing.
Well, thing is, also, peek behind the curtain. This is the first time I'm actually using a Focusrite audio interface with cables long enough for me to stand up. So this is one of the first times I'm standing up doing this. One of the things that I remember reading about, like, improving hosting is if you can stand up, because apparently your diaphragm.
Really?
Your diaphragms. If you're lying down or slacking, like one person in this room is, Tony.
We're the exact polar opposites. I'm literally reclined.
Yeah, so apparently because it relaxes and flattens the diaphragm.
Yeah,
and it requires more energy to be kind of progressed. Like
that makes sense, because whenever you see behind the scenes things about like people recording dialogue for like animated movies or whatever, they're always standing up, aren't they? Or audiobooks maybe less so. But no, I see it. I get it.
And I think like radio DJs, they do that as well. So they kind of like stand up at desks, or they have standing desks. So like Radio 1 DJs, because now they have video, because this is the modern age. They video it as well. They're standing up. So
well, I'm not standing up, I warn you. You can do all that. Your diaphragm, you'll sound inexorably better than me as we talk about the Brittas Empire, but I am not moving, mate. Sorry.
Yeah, well, you have just about 6 hours in the car, and I'm quite concerned that you'll start just nodding off and falling asleep because you are in that position. Yeah,
either or my back is just going to go, no, that's it now, we're not going anywhere. You're on a reclining space. There is a something comfy under you. That's it. So I might be here for a while, mate. Sorry.
Fair enough. Well, just showing your age just by like your back, like
seizing up.
Yeah. Talking about showing their age, let's talk about Brittas Empire Series 6. Series 6 of the Brittas Empire. It aired from February 1996. I think that this might be during... Yeah, this is probably one of the first series that was during the Series 6 and Series 7 gap of Red Dwarf, where there's this it was like the first time there was like an extended gap between series of Red Dwarf. And
Well
then,
done finding a connection to Red Dwarf there beyond Chris Barrie. Excellently done.
yeah, I have to do it. There's a key thing in the title of this podcast, which is like a Red Dwarf podcast.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
I think this podcast is brilliant at skirting the edges of what he can get away with generally.
Oh, we give Mark grief about that all
I
the
know.
time.
We're just as bad, aren't we?
Yeah. Oh, trust me. Yeah, the amount of the amount of content we've been able to get.
Oh, yeah.
I
It's
know.
amazing.
But yeah. So it was at this point, so in terms of perhaps the Red Dwarf life cycle, where people were like, "Is Red Dwarf finished? Are there going to be any more?" And I think with this, and eventually A Prince Among Men, that we've already covered the first series of, like it's the kind of feeling was, oh, are they wanting to move on to do other things? I mean, is Chris Barrie's now like he's been the lead of Brittas Empire for at least 5 years already, but is he kind of wanting to graduate and continue to do more things and stuff? So we're at the point where, like, I think the Brittas Empire at this point, Brittas Empire was firing on all cylinders, and in the mid '90s, especially, Chris Barrie was known as Brittas.
Yeah.
Much more than Red Dwarf.
I imagine. Well, I don't have the viewing figures, but I would imagine Red Dwarf was less populist at its height than Brittas was in terms of actual viewing figures. You know, Red Dwarf was BBC Two, wasn't it, as well? Brittas was BBC One prime time sitcom. So I would guess that even though it's nowhere near as good as Red Dwarf, and even though I've barely watched Red Dwarf, I can promise that. Like, I know that for a fact. Yeah, I suppose to a lot of people who didn't like science fiction or that kind of stuff, they wouldn't have known him from that, would they? He would have been Brittas.
I don't want to be morbid, but like Chris Barrie's obituary would have been like in the '90s, Brittas Empire actor rather than Red Dwarf actor.
Absolutely. I don't think that's the case now.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Even though I still think that there's still a cultural kind of acknowledgement of Brittas, because I mean it's 9 years ago now, but Chris Barrie turned up in a little mix video as Brittas, and I think Brittas is always kind of there.
But what's the story then, right? And I might have jumping the gun, but obviously the last time we spoke, we talked about all that fascinating stuff about how he dies and then he comes back from the dead, and then there's that like Babylon 5 Sleeping in Light style episode set in the future, which we talked about, which was the ending. And then, what is it, 2 years later, they're back. Do you know why? Did it have anything to do with there being a gap in Red Dwarf? And I know the writers had moved on. I know Norris and Fagan had moved on and they weren't involved in this series at least. I don't know about Series 7, but I'm guessing it's the same. So do you have any knowledge about this? Because I am very, very curious. And I can tell by your little face, you do.
Actually, I don't. 'Cause I was trying to read into it and I couldn't really find much. So I've either was looking in the wrong places or there's just not that
There's
much
nothing
on
there. I feel it could be right. You know, maybe I'll try and do this with my my writing and stuff. It feels like there's a retrospective, like bit of TV journalism to be done here, and actually speaking to the writers, because I think it'd be an interesting story if you don't know it.
Yeah, I'll be quite curious. But what I kind of do know is that there's a new writing team.
Yeah.
You can tell because there's a whole section taken out of the title sequence. So the kind of infamous bit where like he uses the leg press and he and they have like created and written by
that's gone.
Fagan and Andrew Norris. That's gone. And I'm trying to figure out whether I'm wondering whether that's why on the DVD like the music starts and there's a freeze frame of the feet on the treadmill. Like,
maybe.
Yeah, which is kind of really weird, and I've
to
never
make it
noticed
last
that before.
long enough.
Yeah, just to cover that. But
probably.
Yeah, so you got Series 6. I'm assuming because it's still kind of like a ratings juggernaut, and they still kind of wanted to do more. So they got a new writing team in. I think I did try and make a note of the writers, but yeah, so I think
you've lost your piece of paper.
Peter Vincent was on one.
What was his name?
Ian Davidson and Peter Vincent.
Okay, yeah.
There's on one, and there was a couple of others, but I do know, and I want to kind of get into this in a second, that I think for at least the first 4, there's like 2 credited writers on each episode, and then I think 5, 6, and 7, there's one writer.
Mm.
And yeah, but it's a team. So instead of having just the two writers writing every single episode, there's like a team of writers that's
Yeah.
starting to. Now, I don't know whether this might be something that I think British comedies will start to experiment with, but I know they do, but I always thought it was slightly later. And I think My Family is the one I can think of where they started to incorporate the American style of writing.
Right, yeah. Like writers' rooms kind of thing?
Yeah. Now, My Family was, it's one of its main selling points was that it was written with that style. So
Yeah.
whereas British sitcoms, for the most part, is a singular voice writing everything.
Mm.
So and they do everything, and or a team or like a duo or something like that. Whereas I can't think of anything before My Family that experimented that. I mean, do you know of any others after that? Or?
I want to say there were a few ITV shows that were trying to do this around this time. I think there was an ITV show called Barbara with Gwen Taylor, and I seem to remember that had a bit of a writer's room kind of style, and that would have been, I think, around the same time-ish, early 2000s, maybe, possibly. But yeah, I don't think it was massively common, no, because, you know, British TV comedy has always been so auteur-driven, really. You know, even in the early 2000s, you've got stuff like The Office, haven't you, which we've talked about before in these episodes. But they're always very writer-specific, as opposed to, you know, American sitcoms that haven't always had that kind of structure. So no, I don't know of many, actually. And it's funny, though, because Brittas has never... It feels like the kind of show that would work in that way, because in the nicest possible way, there's nothing massively original about Brittas. It is essentially Fawlty Towers in a leisure centre. There's no... I don't detect any kind of distinctive stamp of like comedic authorship with Fagan and Norris, really. You know, they're not comedy greats. They're not names. It's not like you're getting something from
John Sullivan or
who?
Like John Sullivan.
John Sullivan, yeah, or even John Cleese back in the day, or even Stephen Moffat, you know, doing stuff like Coupling in a few years. You know, there's immeasurable examples of that, but they're not that at that level. So it feels like, I mean, I don't mean any disrespect to them in a way, but it feels like this could be done for Brittas. And obviously they do it for Brittas, but I didn't really particularly notice a great deal of difference with this series in that style and what we've had before, really.
See, now, I kind of did. Now,
Okay.
So what I found quite interesting with this is that I think, particularly Series 6 and the episodes that we saw, is that there's quite a few visuals and things that have always stuck with me. And I was never quite, and I think I've said this in other episodes of series that we've covered. I get confused of which series is what because I've never had that kind of chronology. I've never watched it. This is the first time I'm kind of watching it sequentially all the way through. And like some of the early stuff I'd never seen before. But this is prime me watching it live, because I can remember watching a few of these when they first came out, because I was 10.
10. I was going to ask you, yeah, because I thought you would surely be around the right age now to watch this.
Yeah. So particularly, and I'm pretty sure I watched some of the early ones, perhaps when I was slightly younger, because basically my mum and dad watched them, I think, as well. But yeah, so quite a few of the kind of things in this I kind of remember. But while I was watching it, you can kind of quite a few of the distinct things that I remember talking about in early episodes. Like, I'm sure I remember characters being a bit more like this. That we're at the point now where those character traits are actually being more prominent. Like, for example, Helen being the prime example. And what I found quite funny is that, if anything, reaching this point after seeing what's happened before, I feel as if the show has kind of turned the characters into very broad strokes of what the characters are. Now, they're not exactly the most well-defined and expansive 3D characters. And I do want to point, and I actually think that, strangely enough, some of the characters we've complained about not doing much actually seem to have greater characterization this series actually.
They do get a bit more to do,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah,
But-
that's true.
But particularly some of the more kind of regular ones, I feel as if they've gotten really broad, or some of the handles of the characters aren't fully clicking right, and you can kind of feel, particularly at the start, like this new writing team trying to figure out their version of the characters, and just it's not working right, or they're taking a while to get in. So, and that's because actually, before I say that, what's your overall opinion of this series?
I don't think it's very good, really. I think that 5th series was probably, on the whole, the best season, like in terms of the character work that was done, the plotting. Like we talked about in the last episode, the idea that it was actually heading somewhere to an extent. Some of the ideas it had, and obviously the ending, which was very interesting and definitive.
Yeah.
And the only reason I imagine this came back is because of ratings and money, and they said, we want to do this, people like it, let's just keep doing it, and everyone was up for it. I think it just isn't very funny. And I think you're right. I think you're right in that the archetypes are dialed up. You've got various examples of that. I mean, Brittas is Brittas, he's pretty much the same, but they really go full bonkers with what's his wife's name? Helen. They go full bonkers with her. Like, Tim just becomes really, really ramped up, jealous boyfriend, constantly erratic, constantly irate, constantly frustrated.
Inconsistent is a word I'd use as
Dialed up, well, yeah, that too. Dialed up to 11. So there's various archetypes that some it's roughly the same. Others, yeah, they dial it up a bit. And I do think it kind of loses something without Julia St. John as Laura as well, because they do essentially try and replace her with a much less effective character. Not replace her pound for pound, but they put another female character in there who just doesn't in any way resonate at all.
Yeah.
And it's like you take her out of the equation, and the show has kind of lost something a little bit. So
yeah, so that's interesting. So yeah, so let's tackle that actually. So the biggest thing that's happened with this is Julius and John basically not coming back as Laura, and
not even mentioned. It's like she's been erased from existence.
Yeah, and I think what the series kind of holds as well, and it kind of shows that of what she should be as a character. And we've talked about in the past that she should be the straight man. She's the straight kind of everyman character who is basically the competent the one. She's the Wilson. She's basically that kind of like basically if her and Brittas was flipped, then everything would be a lot better.
There wouldn't be a show.
Yeah, but the Leisure Centre would be working better, and I think it's only just come across. It's only just. And I know we've talked about The Office and Parks and Rec and everything, and particularly kind of Leslie Knope and Brittas as well. But thinking about what I've just saying, I just realised, there's a reason that Leslie Knope in the show is second in charge of to Ron Swanson.
Yeah.
Whereas if she was in Ron Swanson's position, well, technically she kind of is, but like it makes sense for that kind of character to be lesser. Whereas actually, no, I've just realised that Brittas is in charge.
I know what you're saying, though.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. I mean, you could have got some comedy for a bit at least out of Brittas being demoted and Laura getting the job, and Brittas is constantly there going, "No, Laura, I don't think really we're doing it the right way." That you've got some comedy there for a couple of episodes, but then eventually you got to put him back in charge.
Well, they do that. They did that last series with Gavin. So when Gavin took control, and he says, I'll leave you in charge as a."
Yeah, I suppose they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose they did, really, yeah. So they sort of did that. Yeah. And I suppose Gavin, to some extent, is designed to slot into the Laura role in a way, in that he's now middle management, if you like. He's now his deputy. He's wearing a suit, But it's not the same. It's not exactly the same, really. There's no one really for him to bounce off in that way anymore, really.
And I think with the first episode and with the first episode trying to reestablish stuff, and that series premiere is actually shockingly
with
bad.
a bang. That one's called, isn't it?
Yes, Back with a Bang. It's actually shockingly really badly written because it's so much retconning and trying to get everything back to the status quo, and it just doesn't seem to fully work. The big thing being with Anushka Menzies' character Penny being this kind of independent sauna. So technically, Brits doesn't have any jurisdiction, which on paper sounds like an interesting conceit, or there's like possible mileage that they can do with that, and that I think they feel like they want to have like an antagonistic relationship between Penny and Brittas, because Brittas isn't a fan of the fact that independent, which makes sense because I feel like he can't control or micromanage that aspect, so that's probably what annoys him about it. And
But they never do anything with it, though, do they?
No, so she's supposed at the end she's supposed to have an antagonistic relationship with Brittas about the fact that she doesn't want to be involved, and technically she doesn't have to be, but she's sometimes in meetings, and throughout the series it's like, why am I actually here? I don't have to be here, which on paper again makes sense, but they don't really fully do that, and they then try and recreate the kind of Laura Helen friendship with her.
Yeah.
But because Penny's a lot more of an antagonistic, kind of more self-centered character, whereas Laura was like the most empathetic like character out of a lot of them, she was easy to be able to read and talk, and like everyone kind of bounced off her for like emotional support, and she was kind of the emotionally mature one out of the cast. You don't have that with Penny, which means that this kind of straight man character who is kind of balancing kind of like the mania of Helen and the mania of Brittas, that are two different kind of parts of the same coin. Penny as a character just doesn't work.
Well, she just seems stroppy all the time. She just seems like she's stroppy. She's fed up of being there. But she never really feels like an antagonist. I agree. That's kind of what they're trying to establish her as. But they never do anything with that. She's just mopey. She just mopes around most of the time, or she's a bit hoity. You know, she's basically just the hot posh totty, isn't she? Really, that's the idea. She's blonde. She looks like Lady Penelope from Thunderbirds, basically, which is probably a little bit Penny after all. There probably is a little bit of that. She's just there. She's a very stock, tropey kind of character in some ways, and she feels quite old fashioned in a way. That character, she feels like she could have been ported out of I Been Served or something like that, in a way. And I think I don't think the actor really is very good. You know, she doesn't really do anything even interested with it. She's not particularly funny. You know, and in the end, it feels like they just give her less and less to do throughout the whole series. She ends up just popping up maybe once or twice an episode, mainly to have a scene with Helen, where Pippa Haywood just gets to be Pippa Haywood and do all that sort of which she's great at. I mean, she is the MVP of the whole series at this point for me. Like, no one is as good as her in this show right now.
Part of that is because they just waste Harriet Thorpe, but other than that,
it is because they waste Harriet Thorpe again. Absolutely right, completely. But yeah. They are, apart from Chris Barrie, those two are by far the best characters and actors in the show.
Yeah, I think we said that at least 6 times.
We have, and you know, Helen is she is just now a comic book character completely. Like there's nothing real about her anymore. But they at least understand that, so they just do that. But when, the thing with this season is I can't, I watched these episodes over the last week. And I've struggled to really remember many funny moments from any of them. I'm really, when I think back, I'm really kind of struggling. I can't remember like a great deal about anything that really struck out to me.
There are things that stuck out, but there are things in this series that I often remember. One of the things I always remembered, and I couldn't remember where it happened, was Americans going and going, Mr. Bright Ass.
Oh, Mr. Bright Ass. Okay, that was quite amusing.
Stuck in me.
Yeah.
And the visual of the work experience girl with the speech impediment going, I think I'm going to be thick. For some reason, I've always remembered that.
It's a terrible.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So those kind of things like that. But I mean, the first 4 episodes I think are kind of really kind of weird. Yeah, so I think like the first 4 I think are kind of iffy. And I think those are the ones that have more than one writer. I think the last 3 are slightly better. Out of all of them, the one that I generally actually laughed at, and the only really one that I liked of this series is, I think, it's episode 6, which is the Mr. Brittas Falls in Love.
Was that the one where he falls in love with a dolphin called Ingrid?
Yeah, and that's what I think, because Yeah, and I think because the show's always kind of been about kind of multiple plot threads converging as one and misunderstandings. I think that's the first episode which felt like it could have been a Fagan and Norris script.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Because they ends up being a shark, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They end up accidentally putting a shark
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the pool,
Yeah, which I actually
and they
thought-
do a bit of a Jaws play on
yeah,
that.
which I thought was actually quite
Yeah,
funny.
it's a decent enough
yeah.
joke. Yeah,
and
yeah,
the,
yeah.
And the conceit of what's happening and like how the mix up happens, I think is kind of like previous series and stuff, and I think the visual is quite funny. And then Linda gets quite a rare opportunity to show a separate side of the character because she's been nondescript apart from being quite kind of low key religious, but then she's also now kind of like Citizen Smith,
Yeah.
Wolfie, out to the people, kind of like animal rights activist, which kind of matches it.
I think she's just like extremely on the spectrum, that woman, like that character, like genuinely, like there is something about her that she veers from extremes. She's like, oh, Mr. Brittas, and then she's either really religious or she's really activist or she's really, she's doing an Olympic run or whatever. So she just feels like that kind of character that you can just pop into any kind of extreme thing, She's not a real character. She's not a real person, really, And this, but yeah, I know what you mean. I think there isn't a great deal of note for those earlier episodes. Like Barry gets to do another double thing, doesn't he? He gets to play, in this case, Vlad. I think his name wasn't he?
Beautiful lady.
Beautiful lady, and he gets to do all that.
Yeah,
that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that.
And he's clearly enjoying that, isn't he?
Yeah, shame the rest of the episode's not like very good. That's the one where it's like, I can't believe everyone's that stupid.
Well, it's that that a lot of them actually believe that is Brittas.
Yeah.
Don't they? Even though he's talking like this, and it's a bit, yeah.
And he's
they
wearing
all have a bit
freaking frilly shirts and stuff.
Yeah. It's a bit. All the cast have a brain transplant episode, isn't it? Where they just, yeah. This is where I've said this before about Brittas. I'm sure it's where it's not very. It's comedy that doesn't really credit the audience with a great deal of intelligence, in that it's very lazy comedy, really. It is old-fashioned, quite lazy gag comedy. Often, not always, but often, certainly in episodes like that, where you're asked to completely believe that they would think this. It almost feels like they know that nobody, apart from people like you and me, are going to pay much attention to it while they're watching it. Really.
But then again, I think there is merit in the quote unquote lazy comedies, because I think there are kind of funny versions of that. Because I think
I agree with that.
I agree
with that.
Some of the older kind of higher prestige sitcoms, like Are You Being Served? I think are the same kind of level of comedy.
But now that's the thing, though. They were very popular back then. But I wouldn't say that is prestige anymore. I wouldn't say anyone would look back on that and go, "That's really good, clever comedy." I think there's a difference. I think really you're talking about your dad's armies now that are still looked back on as being clever as well as silly and funny, and they have that level of. They do credit you, the audience, with a bit of intelligence, and they have that level of wit to them. And I don't always think Brittas does. I think sometimes it does, but I think sometimes it goes for the zany joke at the expense of any sense of logic. And I know that we've said before, haven't we, about how it's a hyper real world, really, Whitbury. And I'm not expecting, kitchen sink gritty royal family style realism here, like with this. I'm really not. I'm fine with the silly gag. I'm fine with Colin going, "Oh, I've got my pets pupating, Mr. Brittas," and all that stuff. I don't mind that. I'm fine with all the madness of it. But if you're gonna make a joke work, I feel like you've got to believe that the characters would act a certain way. And I think sometimes they don't. I think sometimes they act in order to try and land a punchline that doesn't always land.
Yeah,
that's my issue.
It's a case of, not going too much into our kind of personal backgrounds, but because we met through a kind of like writing kind of community and like amateur fiction writers. You know, you're
Speak for yourself, mate.
you are.
But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm myself being an amateur screenwriter, you two soon to be hopefully professional,
Well,
like fiction writer at some point.
well, maybe we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Or at least
I
professional.
am joking. We are both amateurs. It's fine.
Yeah. Well,
Nothing wrong with amateurs.
Yeah, you're a kind of professional non-fiction writer, so
Yeah, but that doesn't count. It sort of counts. Anyway, we're getting off topic.
I forgot.
We're both amateurs.
I lost my train of thought.
Well, how we met?
Yeah. What was he talking about before then? Because I was
Brittas and it being lazy comedy and not the characters not always acting.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And because we kind of dabbled in kind of like writing longer form, kind of episodic fiction, script writing stuff. And one of the things that always kind of stuck me when I was like working on the projects and stuff was I think I've always assumed that if a character dictates and forces you to change plot decisions, I feel that's a benefit. So, like, if you want to do something like, oh, and then so and so happens, but then, like, you go, but would character A actually do that? They wouldn't. So, can I get away with doing it? And if the answer is no, then I think that's a level where, as a writer or a creative piece, then you're thinking, okay, I have to work around that because the characters need to react to the character rather than just reacting to the story. And I think that's what happens, particularly with this series, I think, as well, where like sort of non like out of character things happen.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't click as well. Or like the reactions to like the crazy Brittas. And because I'm thinking if Laura was in that episode, they would specifically like perhaps do where Laura just keeps missing the lad or whatever his name is.
Or would know that it's not him.
Yeah.
Or she'd go,
or just play along.
It's not Mr. Brittas. Like, or something like that.
Or immediately know, and like goes like, or just turn around and go, you do know that's not Mr. Brittas, right?
And,
because there's no
none of them are like, yeah. They go, yes, it is. And yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what's actually, yeah. The more I think about it, that's what's missing. And I think if there was a character like Laura, or they had a new Laura substitute to do that, I think the episode would probably be more believable that none of the characters. So we'd probably be by that everyone gets confused because we're missing Laura.
I suppose, yeah. I suppose you could get away with it a bit more, and I think that's the point, really.
Yeah.
They don't adequately replace her, I don't think, really. And I think as a result, they do lean more into the stereotype kind of tropes of it all, you know.
Yeah.
And like I said, particularly with Tim, I mean, I think he's awfully characterized this season. Like,
oh God, yeah.
I
like the idea that like he's got an interesting cooking and shit, and it gives him a new role to do. But the lead up to it,
but he's just shrewish. He spends the whole thing getting really angry and frustrated and jealous and possessive and annoying, frankly. And it's a shame because that relationship is a good one, and it's like he becomes the nagging wife, basically. It's a very old, even for 1996, it feels very old fashioned and outdated.
But then again, though, it's very low key. I mean, earlier series seem to play on the Gavin Tim thing. Here, it's apart from like it feels more like friends bickering. Like, oh, you don't hang around with me more because you've got a job, or you don't hang around with me more because you've got a girlfriend or something.
And Tim's always been a bit like that. Yeah. But not to this level. He is the most key example of how they've dialed it up, like massively. Yeah,
which is a bit of a shame actually, because I do think that episode had quite a few and more of the more funnier moments. Because I think admittedly,
which episode's that?
This is the Peace and Hunger one, because that's
We All Fall Down. That one, is it called We All Fall Down? I think it might be. That might be the best one of the season for me. I think that's the one that made me laugh the most.
There's a couple of bits and visuals there that I thought quite, because then there's a bit where kind of Helen tries to talk Tim down, and there's a bit where she's like being actually quite effective. But then there's the nice, and I mean, I did laugh.
Yeah, because he takes them hostage, doesn't he? Yeah. When he gets less than his pay packet from everybody else.
Yeah. And it's a bit like, and she's talking to Tim, can you please, I can't touch you, but do you want to put this ring on the finger? And then just basically yanks
Yeah.
and slams his head against the wall.
Yeah,
and stuff.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I
yeah.
think that's funny, and I think that's the one where they get all the kids to like hold hands.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
all get electrocuted.
Yeah, and they all get electrocuted.
that feels like quite an early series Brittas type
like a
of
dark
gag.
Brittas.
That
Yeah.
like where people were getting drowned or whatever, or you had all that.
Yeah, because there's the subplot with the guy, because they have the guy with the face where they're trying to say, oh, if this is you, you've won a year's supply of the.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
that again, the rest of the episode didn't fully work, but
No.
I quite liked the idea of it.
That was, yeah.
And the fact that
that
he
was a
ends
good
up-
idea.
And he ends and Brittas not believing him and think he's committing identity fraud and ends up committing murder.
Yeah.
And ends up killing like Helen's first husband, which come out of nowhere. Which I'm unsure.
Oh well, this show's good at that.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Remember think about all the stuff with Laura and that American guy. You know, things just pop out of nowhere, no end in this show.
True.
It's just, and again, that is part of my problem with it, you know. And I think this season, it's funny because obviously it comes back after having an ending, and the thing is, it's whether or not right. And this is where I'd love to port myself back into that time and think about, were people watching television like this and thinking about it as we do, you know, nearly 30 years on, and trying to appreciate it from a level of characterization and plot development and actual evolution as a show? Or did they make these things that it doesn't matter? Like, you just turn up every, I don't know, Thursday night or whatever at 8:30, and you sit in front of the telly, and a silly man with a silly voice is going to come on and go for half an hour, and there are going to be silly people doing very silly things, and that's it. Now, I want to say, no, it's not that, but I kind of think it might be. I kind of think that a lot of this show, particularly this season, is geared for that. It is just meant to be throwaway bit of nonsense.
Yeah, we do not have time to go into this section, into this kind of topic, but what there
No, we actually don't.
we literally don't because of the time and day that we're recording this.
Yeah.
But that's linked to a great conversation about the rise of the microblogger, the rise of the internet, and armchair. Well, there's always been armchair criticism, but nothing on the level of what we have now. So, with the rise of prestige TV and the ability and the fun of just taking something and trying to interpret stuff. I think everyone watching everything will sit down and try and watch something. I mean, I used to run a TV blog. You run TV blogs. You write about TV and analyze TV. So naturally, I think we're kind of people that will try and switch off, but can't and stuff. And I think I probably would, at least at some point, would have liked to rewatch all of Brittas Empire. But I think the only reason that I'm watching it and looking at it analytically is because of covering it for the podcast. And I think it's perhaps a show that's not designed to do that, and probably you naturally won't, because I don't think it's meant to be.
No, no, I don't, and that's it. That's exactly it. Some comedy, I don't know if any comedy is made with this in mind. In a way, like some just naturally lends itself more to a level of analysis and actually unpicking what it's about. Brittas is about stuff. Like, it is, and we've talked a bit about it in some of the previous episodes. But it feels like at this point, and maybe it's just the fact it's 6 series in, you know, but it feels like at this point, all it has left is Chris Barrie doing the Brittas thing, you know, Carol going, all that stuff. It feels like all it's got left now are these archetypes.
Yeah.
Is this stuff.
Yeah, and again, the wrong person to bring this up to because you don't watch Red Dwarf, but the people listen to this.
I never am. This is what I'm on this podcast. You know, I'm just going to keep coming back and talking about things that aren't Red Dwarf. I can't wait to do Tomb Raider with you because of the Chris Barrie link. That's going to be great fun. We should do that. It's a good idea, actually.
They've already done it.
Have they?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll see if I listen to the podcast. I know this already, wouldn't I?
Yeah. Actually, I don't think it's aired.
Oh, good. Okay. I can be forgiven then.
I think the point being that it's that I think. You look at episodes of Red Dwarf, and the episodes of Red Dwarf, whether they are gradually about things, they gradually explore stuff, they they have kind of conceits or themes to do. So it's stuff about artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
There are episodes in early seasons which unintentionally talk about gender, and like basically the nature of self-loathing and introspection. The Dave series eventually, I'm not going to spoil anything because of Mark and Colin, but there's quite a few episodes of Red Dwarf which kind of delve into kind of more of mortality and middle age and aging in ways that I don't think Brittas would ever do.
No, but this is partly why it's endured, I think, and partly why it's still going, and partly why there is such a fervent interest and fandom in Red Dwarf, because it is about something a little bit more, and the comedy has always, even though I'm sure it's at its peaks and troughs like every comedy series does, it's always maintained a level of wanting to be good, wanting to keep being interesting, wanting to keep... And I feel like with Brittas now you've taken away the two writers who were invested in it from the beginning and wanted to create it based on their reasons, you know, the ideas behind Brittas as a character. It just feels now like we're at a point where it is simply now just being on air because it's popular, like I said before. And I think that's a point where you can see, and that's why it feels quite old-fashioned, even for the 90s, because so many of these other shows, like we've mentioned some of the ones before, they went on for years and years and years. And by the last few seasons, the quality threshold was just in the bin because they were popular. They appealed to people who didn't go into these things thinking much about them, who were quite happy to have the same laugh week in, week out. And I'm not saying Brittas is as bad as those at the worst end, because I wouldn't say it is, but I do think it's quite poor at this point. And this season, I think I laughed the least from any of them. Even those earlier seasons that were a bit wobbly, there were more in them that I found of interest than this season.
Yeah, and I think a key thing, and again going back to Red Dwarf, I think what Red Dwarf has and Brittas never did, even when it was back in series 6, was that, and potentially it could be just the cast because there's a lot less. The ensemble is a lot smaller in Red Dwarf, but the characters were very individual, archetypal characters.
They're just really good characters. Unique. I mean, I know I've seen enough to know that they're really good characters, aren't they? In Red Dwarf, they're really memorable. All 4 of them are really memorable. That's
and very different, and like you can, they are very fully fleshed out.
Yeah.
Like, they're not just 2D, they're kind of fully fleshed out, and there are senses of development throughout the series. And
performed really well by really good performers as well. And I don't really think Brittas is quite, beyond about 3 or 4 people, doesn't have that level of quality either.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, even though I think Brittas as a character will probably linger with Chris Barrie, because as a performance, it's always good. And like every time I watch it,
I'd agree with that.
Every time I watch it, because of Chris Barrie, I have to kind of stop myself and think, this is the same person that plays Rimmer. It looks like a completely different person, but it's the same actor.
Yeah.
And I think it's a slight shame at times that, and I still say this as someone who quite likes it, and whilst I didn't enjoy this series enough, I still found it enjoyable to watch. I think Brittas as a character kind of deserves a slightly better show to be in, a slightly better written show to be around.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a bit, and I'm not going to spoil Series 7, but I'm not going to spoil it, but I can't wait to talk about the final series, because
you've said this a few times. I'm very curious.
Yeah, but at this point now, I'm going to guarantee, I don't want to predict your reaction because it might be a spoiler, but I am pretty sure I know exactly what you might be saying.
Okay.
And guaranteed you will message me.
Okay.
After certain episodes and go, you'll message me.
Yeah. I hope so. Like, if I don't, it's probably because I'm too busy looking after a baby. Okay, by that point, all right. That's going to be my excuse.
No. You will be messaging. Yeah,
okay.
You will forget.
All right, then.
You will forget that you've become a dad because of. Yeah.
Wow, that is a big claim. Do you want to tell my wife that? Because I don't think she's going to like that fact, to be honest. In fact, if you want me on for season 7, don't tell her that because she won't let me watch it. No, yeah. I'm very interested. I'm very curious. I hope there's more to say, because I think, The problem with this season is there just isn't a lot there. There isn't a lot of substance at all. It doesn't really have much in the way of decent characterization. The comedic plots and ideas are quite flimsy, really.
We will have stuff to talk
Exactly.
about.
No, I know, and that's good because there's I think this is probably the least of interest of all of them so far this season. And it's weird because it should have been more interesting because they literally bring back a character from the dead. You know, this is the thing, and they reference it. There's a whole thing, isn't there, about how they're not allowed to tell him he came back from the dead because it'll it'll mess up his mind. Which is it's a good idea, but it's one of those things where they very very quick they want to reset the status quo as quick as they can, and not have anything to sort of. It's almost like they were like, oh yeah, we shouldn't have done that. We're a bit embarrassed by that. Let's basically not really mention it at all and just pretend it didn't happen. Yeah. And it's like, well, literally, he was punching his way out of a grave. Like, I just expect a bit more. You know, I think even for something like this, if you're going to do something and you're going to bring back a character who died, commit to doing something with it. You know, so that's the thing. It really does hit the reset button. It hits the retcon button, like you said, and I just think comedies have and will do better than this, you know?
Yeah. And I think and I'm quite looking forward. I am really looking forward to talking about Series 7 because
same.
Yeah.
And the legacy of him as well, and the Brittas legacy, and whether or not he will endure, you know?
But again, no spoilers, but there is a finality to it, so they do. So it isn't a case of.
Okay.
It isn't a case of them being at like.
It just ends and there's no ending.
Yeah. There's an ending.
Okay.
So there is an ending.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I am very looking forward to the
Same
reaction of that. But
we'll get there soon.
Yeah, we'll get there soon. And to be fair, I'm quite surprised you managed to last all 6 series of this. To be honest,
honestly, I think were we not recording, I don't think I would have done. I would have got to Series 5 because you've been banging on about Series 5 for years.
Yeah.
And long before we did these podcasts, so I would have got at least to that point.
Yeah.
And no, what am I saying? I'm a completist. I would have watched all of it.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't think I'd have gone back to the whole thing without you giving me the nudge.
Yeah, and I think to be fair, I think it's because you've always had an interest in British sitcom, and it was one of the more popular British sitcoms of the early 90s in BBC. So it's interesting in its place in that. But
as I'd said before, I'd always had the images of it in my head for years over the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and
so it's been nice to go back and see what it actually was, you know?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about its legacy later on. But but listeners, we are at a quite strict time delay on very strict times because we do have an engagement we have to reach.
We do.
Yes.
That sounds very, very formal, doesn't it? An engagement.
An engagement.
Yes. It's actually a podcast meetup. So some of the We Made This podcasters are meeting up today. So we need to get into central Birmingham and go and hang out with them, don't we?
Yeah, it's not like you're a very prominent person in this organisation.
No, just a wallflower. I'll sit in the background.
Yeah. So if this suddenly feels like it's abruptly ending, or not,
it is. Bye.
Tony, if they want to find you, where can they find you?
Well, tonight it'll be Central Birmingham, but if beyond that, you can find me mainly on Linktree, linktr.ee/AJ Black Writer. You'll find links to all the other podcasts I do, writing, books, etc. So if you have found me of interest, look me up over there. And do check out, if you love British comedy, do check out You Have Been Watching, the podcast about British sitcoms, which I set up with Rob Turnbull, who has been on Shipwrecked and Comatose relatively recently, I think.
On the time of recording, it was yesterday.
Perfect.
And I've listened to it. I was listening to it today. Yeah.
Great stuff. Obviously, has worked on Red Dwarf, so he knows his onions. He's now running it instead of me, as I always do. I set up a podcast, then I bugger off. So now Rob and a good friend of his, he's running that now. But we've had loads of great chats about sitcoms, and he's going to have loads more. So please don't go and look that up. You Have Been Watching. Yes,
exactly. And so go and listen to that. You can find me in all the places that I've told you in the past. I mean, if you're
they remember.
Yeah, if you're listening to this, you would have listened to all the previous episodes. You would have listened to the main episodes.
That's a big assumption.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a core group of people like me who've never watched Red Dwarf and are only listening for the Brittas Empire. How do you know? I bet there is.
And if their first episode is Series 6.
True. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You've done it wrong, guys.
Yeah. It's Linktree Linktree / Matt J. Latham. All the other stuff I'm doing on there. But yeah, I can't remember exactly where we are in this, but I do think this is before Series 10. It might be, this is recording before we have the watchathon, so at this point, I probably would know Mark and Colin's reactions to Series 10, which I'm really looking forward to. So yeah, so carry on listening. Red Dwarf content will be coming back to you very, very soon. And with that, there's only less thing to say is, excellent, Anthony.
Excellent.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This Podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at wemadethispod.
In the existence of X-Files podcasts? Then the truth is in here. I'm Tony.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Carl.
And I'm Armoldrake.
And the X-Cast is devoted to all things X-Files, such as in-depth episode discussions.
I love the 8th season being like, no, you're saying goodbye. And that's something pop culture doesn't do enough.
Interviews with many of the cast and crew from the show.
I had to audition repeatedly. I mean, I went in, I read for Chris and Frank, first I read for the casting director, Rick, and then I made it past that hurdle and read for Chris and Frank, had a lovely meeting with them.
And special roundtable chats, commentaries, and fun bonus episodes.
But this is great. Mulder just having no idea what's going on.
On this beautiful boat with people not really speaking English.
You can find us on the We Made This Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all good podcast players.
We'll see you in the basement. But until then,
trust
no
one.